Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Retrofit Everything session, Scaling Action in New York and Ontario. So today we're going to take a couple of different approaches to retrofitting buildings, specifically residential buildings. I'm going to take a little bit of a look at what we're doing in New York State, and our colleagues in Toronto will give us a little bit of insight on how they're addressing high performance within their portfolio. So in New York State, we have some aggressive climate goals codified in the CLCPA of 2019. We're looking at some pretty aggressive targets: 70% renewable electricity by 2030, with a 40% GHG emissions reduction by 2030, and looking to transition to 100% clean electricity by 2030, with an 85% greenhouse gas emissions reduction by 2050. Of course, we know buildings are going to be a huge part of this, and specifically existing buildings. The work that we have ahead of us is really figuring out what to do with our existing buildings, how to make them perform at that passive house level of performance. And specifically, the Retrofit New York initiative is really looking at how do we get to net zero or near net zero level of performance. So when we look at these specific issues, we've got relatively low vacancy rates here in New York State. We're looking at a scenario where most of the buildings that need to be addressed are already in existence. So we have an existing building stock that we really need to address. There's currently no easy implementable solutions, no cost-effective solutions to really get to that passive house level of performance. So that's all driving us to look at this more industrialized approach to deep energy retrofits and really bringing in the needed level of performance to really hit our climate mitigation goals. So this isn't a new idea. The idea of taking an industrialized approach to building retrofits was really pioneered in the Netherlands about 10 years ago with the Energy Sprong initiative. And we're looking to bring that model to New York State and really follow in a similar track as they've really set out to do in the Netherlands, and it's currently scaling its way across various European countries. The Retrofit New York initiative is all about bringing the stakeholders together to really drive innovation in this space and really making this type of an approach possible. So really bringing together the stakeholders, manufacturing partners, various agencies across the state, building owners, the construction industry, to really look at a new, more innovative way to deliver this type of a retrofit. So specifically, what we're looking to do is really deliver an off-site manufactured approach that really delivers a passive house level of performance to building owners that really need this type of a solution. So we know cost compression is key, and this is what's really attracting us to this industrialized approach, and really taking a lesson from what happened in the Netherlands during the Energy Sprong program. In a handful of years, they were able to significantly decrease costs, moving from similar price points to what we're looking at right now today at about 150,000 per dwelling unit, to substantially lower costs, so something on the order of a 50% or greater reduction in costs using this industrialized approach. So what have we done to date with the Retrofit New York program? I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about that. So in 2018, Retrofit New York really launched its first public-facing initiative through a design RFP that was launched in February of 2018. During the course of that process, 6 design-build teams were qualified and selected, and we ensued on a 6-month design process for those initial pilot projects. So by the end of 2019, we did have 6 designs that those teams produced. In the middle of 2019, our first pilot actually entered construction, and earlier this year, we're kicking off a pilot effort with NYCHA, the New York City Housing Authority, to look at deep energy retrofits within their portfolio. Go into a little bit more detail on NYCHA and that pilot opportunity a little later. And we're also doing some work with demand aggregation with the buildings in our neck of the woods. So the pilots that we released in the first round, so these are design pilots, so we don't anticipate that all of the pilots will actually make it to construction, but we are anticipating about half of those pilots to actually make it to construction. Right now we have the Riseboro Casa Pasiva project, which is in the middle of the slide. That project is currently in construction, and we're anticipating the Joe NYC project, which is on the right side of the slide, to close and enter construction around Q3 of this year. Unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 impacts and the shutdowns, there's a lot of uncertainty around timing and the ability of various stakeholders to move forward, but we are hopeful. Similarly, we've done 3 design pilots outside of New York City to target low-rise typologies. We're anticipating at around Q3 this year that the Rock Properties project in the middle of the screen will also enter construction. So a lot of learnings from that first round. Took a couple of bumps, but we're all the better for it. So some of the successes and challenges that we had very engaged teams. We had some viable designs actually put on the table, and we did start to see the supply chain actually start to innovate. Some of the big challenges, to no one's surprise, cost is a huge driving factor here. Some of the technology just isn't quite ready for prime time. Specifically, we have some challenges around electrification of domestic hot water for larger buildings. The supply chain isn't really where it needs to be to really take on this energy sprung style approach. And market segmentation is a challenge. So data about the market, data about the buildings, that's very much an issue that we're still confronting and we're attempting to really remedy. So we've had some time to digest all of the learnings, and what we've done is really pivoted our approach away from this design-centric approach to more of a product development and implementation approach. So to put it blunt, if you want to really pursue an energy sprung style retrofit, you need energy sprung style products in the market, and we just don't have that. So a lot of the focus of the Retrofit New York program is really bringing those integrated classes of components to our market, so we can then move to more of an industrialized energy sprung style model. So to that end, in Q4 of 2019, we released what we're calling the Next Gen HVAC Challenge Round 4. And as part of that challenge, we put out to have what we're calling an energy pod, which is an integrated mechanical system that delivers the heating, cooling, domestic hot water, ventilation on an apartment level basis. The image that you see in the slide right now is an example of an energy pod that's available in the Netherlands through Factory Zero, and we're looking to bring something similar to our market. We did get quite a bit of interest in that round, and we got a handful of viable proposals actually put in, but unfortunately, again, due to the shutdown, that's causing all kinds of impacts and ability of manufacturers to actually come through and develop what they actually propose. So there are some impacts that we're trying to mitigate, but ultimately we do expect to see some product come out of this effort in the next, I would say, 12 to 24 month time frame. So what are we looking to do in the near term going forward? So similarly, we're looking to do something, put out some support for building envelope. So really get firms to come in to develop solutions specifically for the retrofit space for more comprehensive building products. So things like panelized building envelopes, and specifically for retrofit application. Similarly, we want to put out some support to what we're calling solution providers. So what's a solution provider? That is an entity that will deliver the end-to-end solution to the building owner using more of a turnkey approach. So there's not anything quite like that in our market, and there's a fair bit of work to do there. But in essence, we're really looking to drive a new way of doing business through this solution provider model. And in essence, what we're looking to do is bring more innovative business models to the space, really pulling on all the levers, supply, demand, finance, regulation, to really look at how we can really drive this approach in our market. So when you look at an existing project, a construction project right now, you have an owner that needs work done on the building, and you have a bunch of actors trying to deliver that service in a less than optimal way. What we're proposing is to really flatten the market a little bit and provide all those services through that solution provider through use of more integrated components. So that needs a fair bit of work, and we're in process of making the business case to do just that. And what does that mean, making the business case? Well, there's quite a bit of work ahead of us. Part of what we have to do is really reduce barriers to entry in the market. And when we talk about making the business case, there are pretty big ticket items that we need to address. So items such as quantifying the market opportunity, really providing risk mitigation mechanisms, and really making sure that capital is used more efficiently in that process. And again, really sizing the capital need to support our stakeholders on that initial ramp-up period. And of course, using those development of innovative business models to really drive cost compression. Part of bringing more innovative business models to the market is really pulling the sector into the new millennia. And we think a big part of that is utilizing technology to implement digital processes. And when we say digital processes, we're talking about a digital process that's end-to-end. So all the way from the initial customer acquisition all the way through to manufacturing. So we're looking at the way buildings are actually measured and scoped, and really the entire chain that's associated with that. So all the way from drawings and really transitioning that to manufacturers in a relatively seamless way. We think there's a lot of cost compression to be had in that model, and looking at that process from end to end. Similarly, we're looking to really provide better information to our manufacturing partners. And as I mentioned before, this is, ironically, it is an issue in New York State. I think people know intuitively that there are a lot of buildings in New York State, but we really have a difficult time putting our finger on what those buildings look like, exactly how many buildings are in New York State. We're working with Syracuse University and Pratt Institute on a market characterization study that's attempting to answer some of that question. They're using kind of a two-pronged approach there, in which we have some data that we're looking to really quantify the scale of the opportunity. But on the other side, they're taking also an innovative approach, looking at historical archives to really get some perspective on construction techniques and what a building envelope actually looks like, and trying to bring those data sets together, those separate sets of information together, to really make some recommendations to manufacturers. So we've identified 7 typologies of interest, and we're hoping to release that report over the next, I would say, about 2 months, to really get folks really dig into the issue there. So I mentioned we're working with NYCHA. At the beginning of this year, we launched, NYCHA launched an RFP to really look at deep energy retrofit within their portfolio. New York City Housing Authority, they're the biggest landlord in the country. A lot of potential there, with 178,000 apartments and more than 2,500 buildings. It is an aging portfolio, and there's a lot of opportunity there. When you look at the actual performance of the portfolio, as I said, tremendous opportunity there. But at the rate of improvement in terms of the efficiency of the portfolio, they're going to miss their 2030 and 2050 targets mandated by the CMA by quite a lot. So to that end, we're putting out the call for scalable solutions in the NYCHA portfolio to really drive a deep level of savings in terms of performance, and really improving aesthetics and comfort in the apartments. So we're in process of reviewing the proposals. We've got about 10 proposals that came in. We're going to be selecting one team. That team will have an opportunity to pick from a handful of buildings for a future pilot opportunity. NYSERDA is going to be providing technical assistance, and the idea here is to really land on a solution that's scalable and that we can actually repeat in the NYCHA portfolio on additional or multiple pilot sites. So just a couple of words about time frame of that pilot. So I mentioned at the beginning of the year in January, so mid-January, NYCHA did release the RFP. NYSERDA in March released a request for qualifications to qualify the teams that would be eligible to actually submit to that RFP. We're anticipating making an announcement, an award in Q3, possibly Q4 of this year, after which we'll enter into a 6-month design period in Q4 of this year and transition to the beginning of a 12-month construction period in about Q4 2021. So we have a lot of high hopes there. And as I mentioned, a lot of people are paying attention to that space because NYCHA, when you think about NYCHA, you think about scale, and Retrofit New York initiative is all about scale. So what else are we doing in the market? So one of the big things that we want to get across to our stakeholders is that we want to think in terms of products and not projects. What does that mean? It means that we want to come up with approaches that are relatively scalable, or I should say very scalable, with minimal effort to very fixed use cases. So in essence, we're looking at the bespoke approach that we use today in terms of building retrofits, and a really industrialized model that's in use in the Energy Sprong initiative right now. So we want stakeholders to really think in terms of products and approach the retrofit as a product. So something that could be snapped at over and over and over again to really gain the efficiencies of scale. So that's what we're trying to drive into the market right now, and we're trying to support that process as much as possible. So later this year, what we're planning on doing is really releasing a request for qualifications to really target some needed elements before we go to our next round of pilots. Specifically, we want to qualify solution providers, we want to qualify manufacturers, and we want to qualify specific buildings for the next rounds of pilots that we do from here on out. So what this does, it really creates an entry point for stakeholders into the program, and we're looking to really gain much more visibility about the potential that's in the market, both on the supply and demand side. And what the plan is to really qualify these pools and then to draw from those pools to then build teams to transition to pilots. So in the next couple of years, we're looking to do proof of concept pilots on a low volume basis. And once those kinks really get worked out, we're looking to start early production ramps to start getting some early scale in the various portfolios across the state. So demand aggregation, that's something we're doing in tandem with the efforts that we're looking to do on the industry side. So demand aggregation is really about elevating the voices of building owners and having them speak in unison to really get the industry to move on specific solutions. So to that end, we're in the process of kicking off what we're calling the Retrofit New York Pledge. And this is basically a way to really have building owners come together and really leverage their voice en masse and really present this opportunity to manufacturers, to suppliers, to really get them to see that there is an opportunity here. And what the need is. Specifically, what the pledge does is really outline the criteria that the solutions need to hit. And if those solutions do hit the stated criteria, then you have a market here that's ready to invest, ready to actually jump on that solution. So we're talking about, the broad criteria that we're really targeting. Ease of application, that's a given. We're trying to really implement this industrialized approach. Ease of operating and maintenance, net zero or near net zero levels of performance. We're requiring no fossil fuels on site in the long term. In the short term, we know that there's a bit of a transition that needs to be made there. So, we're a little bit flexible on that point. But the end state is a solution that's all electric. And of course, we need it to be cost effective. So we're in process of actually doing a lot of outreach to building owners right now and really getting them to sign on to this effort. Also, what we're doing, is really looking to identify regional partners. So who are the actors outside of New York State that can really take a model like this, look at it, and try to implement? We're actively looking for those partners. We're working with DOE. We're working with folks like RMI on the West Coast to really look at a more national scale, and a lot of work is ongoing in that respect. This is really a situation where you have the more the merrier. Literally, what we want to do is paint a scale opportunity to manufacturers and suppliers. And the broader we can make that base, the more cost compression we'll have, and the quicker we'll actually have cost compression in the space. So putting the call out there, if you think wherever you are, there's an opportunity in your vicinity to really look at this model and maybe implement in your region, please reach out. We're always interested in having those conversations. And if there's anything that I've said that is of interest, jogged anything in your brain, reach out. If you want to learn more, reach out. We're really looking for a couple of mad scientists to come in here and really take a more out-of-the-box approach to really figuring out some of these difficult questions. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Anna at the Toronto Community Housing to really give you some insight into what they're doing with high performance in their portfolio.
Thanks very much, Chris. That was a great presentation. My name's Noah Slater. I'm the Director of Capital Planning, Design, and Engineering for Toronto Community Housing, and I'm joined today by Anna Kazmierska, my colleague, and we'll be speaking about the Toronto side of retrofitting everything. And my colleague from New York did a great job talking about some of the innovative work they're doing in low-rise. And for our presentation, we wanted to talk about some of the innovative work we're doing on our high-rise typologies. Our part of the conversation is organized into 4 parts. We'll give you a brief overview of our building portfolio and tenants. We'll take a look at our funding outlook, and then I'll turn it over to Anna, who will talk about the importance of the high-rise typology to our portfolio and our capital goals, and also where passive house fits in and scalability. So first, a look at our portfolio and our tenants. Toronto Community Housing owns over 2,000 buildings across Toronto, serving over 100,000 residents, ranging from low-income families to vulnerable populations, recent immigrants, and others. It represents over 50 million square feet of residential area and also commercial spaces that we also run. And in total, it's over $10 billion of a public asset. Importantly for Toronto Community Housing is really our philosophy, which is putting tenants at the center of everything we do, including capital work and capital planning. We engage with our tenants, we listen to our tenants, and we put their well-being at the center of everything we do. And as a result, we've been innovative in the way that we've engaged with them, notably around capital work. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation as well. This slide describes the difference between Toronto Community Housing's tenants and the average demographics across Canada, across Toronto rather. As you can see, we have nearly twice as many children and youth by population than the City of Toronto average, 50% more seniors than the Toronto average, and far more single parents. Like most social housing, as you can see at the bottom of this slide, the median income of one of our tenants is a fraction of the Toronto average. And those present all kinds of unique challenges for us. For instance, in this next slide, you can see just a breakdown of the type of tenants we serve and our clientele. 89% of our tenants pay rent geared to income, far lower, obviously, a fraction of market value, notably in Toronto. 1 in 5 of our tenants are living with mental health issues and challenges. 2 in every 5 households identify as having a member with a disability. And there's thousands of our households where residents struggle to keep their homes free of excessive clutter and hoarding, which impacts safety, pest control. So lots of unique challenges in delivering capital work in a social housing environment. But most importantly, as you can see on this next slide, only 3% of our RGI, rent geared to income, tenants pay their own utility bills. And when you're talking about a corporation that has over $150 million a year in utility costs, having a clientele that doesn't even receive a utility bill presents, again, some unique challenges about how to engage tenants around conservation, how to engage tenants around capital work that's energy oriented, and how to save on energy and consumption across a portfolio-wide approach when your tenants are that disenfranchised from their own consumption. In this next slide, we describe the age of our portfolio. And the vast majority of our housing stock comes from the housing boom of the late 60s, early 70s in Toronto. And as you can see on this graph and this pie chart, essentially 88% of our housing stock is between 30 and older than 50 years old. And that presents, again, some unique challenges in terms of existing conditions and the building typologies we deal with. And we'll go into some detail on that. But on this next slide, you can see the net result of that age of portfolio. And that's essentially what we're experiencing now, some 30 to 40 to 50 years later after a building's been originally constructed. We're experiencing a veritable tsunami of capital needs that are coming into us. And these aren't needs that are small component replacements or the need of small repairs that extend the life of building components. This is really, we're starting to see holistic systemic failure of systems, failure of envelope systems, failure of mechanical systems. And like most social housing providers, our portfolio has been historically underfunded, and we're dealing with that now in the here and now. And that's why you're seeing this tidal wave of needs come from the age of the buildings. So part 2, our funding outlook. This graph charts historically what our capital spend has been over the last 7 years. And as you can see, it has grown exponentially. We are at 6 times what we were in 2013 in terms of our capital expenditures. That's a huge change in a very short time. And what that means is that our facilities management staff and the staff who design and engineer and deliver these projects has had to be nimble and shift their paradigm of thinking. We've moved at Toronto Community Housing from a patchwork approach to repairs to a far more holistic and complete approach. With more funding, we're able to look at whole building systems. We're able to look at communities. We're able to look at other aspects of the building that require repair all at once, which allows us to minimize disruption to tenants, and it allows us to enjoy efficiencies of construction by ganging work together, as opposed to fixing the one window, the one boiler. We'll come in now and be able to do a more holistic takedown of building repairs. But importantly, the percentage of energy-based funding that forms a part of our capital plan has also grown exponentially. And in 2020, $158 million of our $350 million capital plan is energy-based in nature. That's almost half of our capital plan is based on funding that comes with energy commitments. And we embrace that type of approach because for us in the design and engineering department and the facilities management department, we don't differentiate between a building that's performing well. A building that's performing well from an energy point of view is going to be performing well from a tenant comfort point of view and from a capital condition point of view as well. And that's also to say that the imperative of spending on energy has increased over the years, and we take that challenge seriously. In this next slide, you're seeing a table that outlines the funding and program progression over the last number of years. And we started out about 4 years ago with relatively smaller programs. A $28 million social housing program with energy goals that we would couple with a loan program to get a more robust funding structure around our work. And it has progressed to $1.34 billion, which we recently secured from the federal government as part of their National Housing Co-investment. So we've seen this huge progression of funding and energy-based funding. And about 4 years ago, when I first came to Toronto Community Housing, and we were looking at one of these social housing funding programs, we made, again, a philosophical decision. Rather than rolling out a component-based program, changing boilers across the portfolio or introducing heat exchange or some sort of small measure across a wide swath, we made a decision that we were going to look at individual buildings and that we were going to try to couple poor facility conditions with poor energy performance, so that we would essentially be getting $2 out of every dollar of funding. And we started to look at this holistic single building approach. And it took some fortitude from the capital planning side at first, because our staff and our board were not acclimatized to a proposal that put forward spending upwards of $8 to $10 million at a single building. So that definitely took some socialization on the part of the facilities management group. And that's one of the things we want to talk about today as being scalable, this philosophy of doing holistic, complete repairs at single buildings. And now that we've managed to secure this $1.34 billion over the next 8 years, we have the ability to plan ahead, we have the ability to be proactive, and we have the ability to spend more wisely, because we have some consistency and some dependency on our incoming funding, which we've never enjoyed before. And of course, this funding is coupled with municipal funding that we've recently secured as well. So there's a lot of responsibility with this money, and we also enjoy the fact that it's tied to things like accessibility and energy and facility condition. In fact, in this next slide, this is a Venn diagram, obviously, that's been put together to describe our project prioritization under this new philosophy of capital delivery. And we're really looking at facility condition, we're looking at accessibility, and we're looking at energy performance. But mostly we're putting our tenants at the center of those decisions, and their well-being at the center of every design and engineering decision that we make. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anna, who's going to take us through part 3 and 4 to see how this philosophy comes into play and is scalable.
Thanks very much, Noah. Now I'm just going to be speaking about the importance of the high-rise typology and opportunities for scaling and the role of passive house principles as we move forward. So firstly, just to give you a bit of an overview of the Toronto sphere in terms of carbon emissions, buildings represent about 56% of overall carbon emissions in the city of Toronto based on 2017 data. So it certainly gives us an opportunity to make a significant impact as Toronto's and Canada's largest social housing provider, to make an impact and see some serious reductions in these overall emissions. So in terms of our buildings as a typology specifically, Noah was mentioning that we will be focusing on the high-rise typology. And a lot of this is actually driven from the fact that on a unit basis, 62% of our residents are actually situated in these high-rise 8+ story apartment typologies, with another 13% being sort of in the mid-rise 5 to 7 story apartments. So it certainly allows us to make a large impact and affect the well-being of a large majority of our tenants' lives and well-being. And specifically for the high-rise typology, from an energy standpoint as well, there's a huge opportunity to achieve those savings, just given the fact that 13% of our buildings within our portfolio represent upwards of 84% of our overall electricity consumption and 70% of our natural gas consumption. So I'm just going to walk you through some of the features of one of our typical towers. So this one was constructed in 1962 and is in that vintage that Noah was mentioning, where a lot of our buildings were constructed in that 60s and 70s timeframe. And so a lot of these features can be applied more broadly to our portfolio. So in terms of the units themselves, they're fairly large. If you can see here, we've got a legacy of patchwork repair due to, in some cases, the size of the funding. And so a lot of the repairs historically have been more patchwork, more piecemeal. In the case of the envelope, it's been a lot of sort of situated metal or stucco applications, with also some structural issues that have then been concealed as a result of that. At our ground levels, we generally have a fairly vibrant space with community agencies occupying it, with site offices and recreational rooms for our tenants. We've got underground parking garages that are generally underused in this day and age. And then in terms of the envelope itself, typically an undrained masonry wall, not insulated, and if insulated, typically looking at sort of 1 inch of insulation. So a pretty nominal amount that doesn't result in a comfortable environment for our tenants. With the buildings being 50 plus 60 plus years, where we're seeing evidence of a failure with spalling and bonding, and certainly allowing air and water infiltration into the building interior. We've also, for a large part, have balconies on our buildings. So certainly having exposed balcony slabs, exposed slab edges throughout the building, and in some cases, vertical shear walls protruding through the envelope, creating some significant challenges from a thermal bridging standpoint, and some other structural issues that we need to contend with as we're looking to repair these buildings. From a glazing standpoint, we've got oftentimes original windows to the building, aluminum framed for these high-rise applications, single pane glass, not thermally broken, sealants failing. So as Noah was mentioning previously, in the past, the repairs have sort of been specific to a complaint in a unit, and we didn't have the luxury of being able to do wide-scale replacements. And lastly, then just looking at guardrails for the balconies and discrete entrances, which in some cases are narrow and don't afford accessibility, which is definitely something that we're considering as part of these projects moving forward. From a mechanical standpoint, most of the services are located at the rooftop level. So from a ventilation standpoint, we have rooftop makeup air units that provide ventilation centrally through duct shafts that then deliver the air through at each floor, and then at that point the air is drawn into our units through the exhaust fans that are continuously running in the washrooms. From a heating standpoint, we've generally got boilers up on the roof, either combined serving domestic hot water and heating. In some cases they are combined. In the suites themselves, generally have hydronic radiators. Oftentimes, if they did originally contain controls, those controls are no longer functional. And so in essence, the building is operating as a single zone. So there certainly is tenant discomfort associated with generally too hot conditions in the heating season, just because at that point there isn't the ability to turn down heat on an individual basis to serve individual needs. And then finally, limited exhaust. So generally a lack of kitchen exhaust, and the washroom exhaust, even though it is centrally exhausting in most conditions, sometimes those ducts actually are obstructed due to age or a lack of care. So in addition to some of the inherent challenges that we've got with our building features, Noah had alluded to some of these. We also have some of the additional considerations for when undertaking massive work at these buildings. So we've got the occupied conditions, which creates, as Chris also had alluded to, just a additional considerations for phasing work and for making sure that the disruptions and downtime of services are minimized. As Noah had mentioned, tenants typically do not pay utilities, so that financial incentive to monitor your consumption is not necessarily a driving factor for us, and we need to engage with tenants in other ways. Also, just something as simple as existing records to understand the systems that are original to the building. Many of these buildings had been downloaded historically through sequencing of restructuring, and so the documentation that we've got for some of our buildings is quite poor, and requires a lot of on-site investigation to sometimes understand the buildings truly. Obviously, the poor facility condition for buildings that are 50 and 60 years old, if not older. The patchwork repair, also in some cases not properly documented. So just making sure that's considered with any future designs. Lack of cooling. So centrally, there is no cooling generally provided for our existing buildings, which then leads tenants to need to install their own means of cooling in their units. So generally a floor-mounted portable air conditioning unit, which then also needs to consider the aperture for integrating with any of the windows in the building. Also, public procurement. I say that this is just more of a consideration as a public entity, ensuring that we're compliant with protocols and making sure that any opportunities are fairly laid out to interested parties. And lastly, as Noah was mentioning, the vulnerable tenant population. So work in existing buildings, as Chris had alluded to, present some new challenges, and definitely we're excited to see what opportunities the market is able to come up with for this building subset. So now going to scalability and Passive House. So this was just taken from a clip on Passive House Canada, just the definition of a passive house, and I noticed that there are quite a few alignments with the Retrofit New York pledge that we certainly, as an organization, align with in terms of our overall objectives and our focus on the tenant experience in our buildings. So fine-tuned control over indoor air quality and temperature if tenants are afforded the ability to control their space conditions. It makes for a more pleasant living experience and that overall satisfaction. Simple to use and durable systems. As a property owner, we certainly want to make sure that our systems are robust, not only because of the wear and tear that they end up experiencing in our buildings, but also just the fact that we'll be holding on to these pieces of equipment and want to make sure that there is that value for money there, and that they're simple to use both for the end user as well as simple to operate for our site staff. Next, reductions in operating costs to be certainly offsetting any of the capital premiums. Once again, having that long-term perspective in mind as a property owner with utility bills of upwards of $150 million a year. Any improvements to that absolutely makes a huge difference and allows us to reinvest those savings into our assets again. And obviously, with the reduced consumption, we're able to look at reductions in carbon emissions. So definitely a lot of alignments with Passive House, as well as what Retrofit New York is striving for. So as Noah had mentioned, I'll just give you a quick overview of one of the first buildings that we were able to look at a solution that was more wholesome as opposed to a piecemeal approach. And as Noah had mentioned, there certainly was a lot of hesitation to proceed in this manner, but I think the results are pretty spectacular, and definitely this was an important building to start us off on this sort of holistic mindset. So on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see there's 30 Teasdale here on the left, and then it's a sister building, so to speak, on the right-hand side. So you're able to see sort of a lot of the patchwork applications of stucco and panelized systems on the existing masonry. And what we were able to achieve, I think, was a very smart aesthetic that has certainly improved the tenant quality of life in that building. And although 30 Teasdale was only completed recently, 40 Teasdale is definitely on our radar to complete next. Further to, as the funding had grown, we've been able to not only look at more measures at one building, but be able to actually scale up across more buildings. So up until recently, as Noah had mentioned, we've been able to sort of focus on 9 to 12 buildings as part of a program, often sort of incentivized by higher levels of government. And with the National Housing Strategy, we're able to look at 80 plus buildings, which represents about 15,000 residential units. So we're truly excited about the opportunity of this scale, and we'll be going into that in just a second. So what I'd like to do now is just sort of take you through the measures that we typically look at these holistic retrofits. So firstly, looking at the architectural and building envelope, looking at rehabilitating the envelope, overcladding and addition of insulation, all outboard, given the fact that it is an occupied condition, replacing windows, looking at roof replacement and balcony slab repairs, as well as installation of guardrails. Next, on the mechanical, electrical, and control system as well, with consideration of the envelope, looking at space and domestic hot water heating solutions, ventilation, both central and in suite, looking at reinstating controls and looking at the terminal heating units inside of the units, looking at lighting upgrades across common areas, as well as the units themselves and any sort of exterior lighting and garage lighting, and plumbing, both the fixture side as well as any of the distribution piping, and finally building automation systems. So making sure that accountability is there, that visibility of how building systems are currently operating and whether they are operating at their optimum level. And then also just tying it back into the national housing strategies of accessibility while we're in there at that point, using it as an opportunity also to upgrade interior and exterior common areas for accessibility. So in terms of scalability and market transformation, I think this is quite an exciting opportunity for Toronto community housing and truthfully the market as a whole, with these 80 plus buildings that we've got a mandate for upgrading in the next 8 or so years. That represents 15,000 units that we're able to affect, as well as roughly about 100,000 windows. So it's definitely an opportunity that we've realized as an organization, and we're eager to sort of see what kind of solutions are out there from the design community, and as Chris had mentioned, from manufacturers, and what kind of products can support us with meeting our objectives. So the objectives that we've set out for as we sort of enter this work, and mind you, we're also quite early on in our journey, and recognize that we've got a lot to learn. But ideally, we're raising the quality and energy performance of capital retrofit work. We are creating a set of innovative design solutions to address issues specifically unique to social housing, and then also being a public entity and wanting to sort of scale this out as much as possible is lower that price point of higher performing products by leveraging the purchase power of larger volumes. So I think a lot of this speaks to what Chris's group is looking to achieve in New York, and the hope is that these products can then be available in a broader market that we would certainly be excited to see and implement. So what have we done sort of to date to set ourselves up for success as we sort of undertake this unprecedented growth is we've been obviously delivering work in occupied conditions for quite some time. And as Noah had mentioned, it's certainly been a shift for our staff to switch from a patchwork approach to holistic. And so I think these past few programs that we've had that are energy based have forced those kind of mindsets to start to change, and I think the outcomes have been quite wonderful. And then being able to use these past projects as an opportunity to learn from them and to continuously refine that approach, both on the design side as well as on the construction side. And then through the use of pilot projects and implementing sort of innovative solutions on a particular typology or a typical project, we've been able to sort of understand what works, what doesn't work, and make those adjustments accordingly as we move forward. So some examples of our pilot projects to date have been looking at applications of heat pumps, both in low-rise and high-rise solutions, temperature controls and smart temperature controls, looking at renewable energy opportunities, and also, more importantly, sort of tracking the performance of these pilot projects just to inform future decisions and understand the effectiveness of those programs. Another initiative that we've been undertaking is just getting the research community on board and allowing us to test some ideas before perhaps expending capital. So we've collaborated with academia, with local utility companies, manufacturers, and not-for-profit organizations. So some initiatives that we've been currently looking at are air tightness. We actually, as a rarity, have a vacant building that is currently being retrofitted. And so the University of Toronto conducted a pre-retrofit whole building air tightness test. And we're excited to be able to do a post-retrofit assessment once the work is completed there. Other initiatives include ventilation distribution, so understanding how air makes its way into a unit, and then also how it's actually distributed and dispersed within an individual unit itself, and understanding what various options we have, both from a centralized standpoint as well as a compartmentalized ventilation approach. Next, we've been working with Passive House Canada specifically just to identify any barriers that may present themselves to undertaking EnerPHit on various building typologies. So I'm excited to see the outcomes of that once it's available. And so we can then better understand where we need to focus our efforts and where the critical details lie. And then lastly, thermal comfort. So once again, going back to that tenant focus and recognizing that thermal comfort variables may change from a building to building based on not only the building envelope characteristics, but also the tenant demographics. So certainly setting ourselves up for an exciting but large journey ahead. And then lastly, speaking to what Chris was also mentioning in terms of just collaborating, the more the merrier. There are certainly lessons learned from other organizations and entities that have undertaken these kind of projects, just to share that information and bring those various perspectives together, just to make sure that we arrive at a more informed solution moving forward. So obviously, we've been working with our tenants throughout these various projects. Their input as to what works in their building, I think, is quite important, and certainly results in a smoother project delivery, just to make sure that they are engaged and informed about the work taking place. And then also, I would say more importantly, is ensuring that we're seeing that performance and the savings realized through the operations phase. So I don't think any of this is possible without sort of bringing the tenants into the mix. From an internal stakeholder perspective, understanding that there are different entities that affect our ability to procure, and working closely with our strategic procurement team, and then also our site staff that end up sort of being responsible for the day-to-day operations and upkeep of the building. It's critical to get their input. And then also, I guess more and more importantly as well, is the industry, and just sort of seeing what kind of solutions are out there, as Chris was mentioning, understanding not only the projects that have been a success, but also looking at the products that could be applied in a occupied retrofit condition. And so what we've recently started off on was a working group for windows, specifically understanding the shear quantity that we've got, the purchasing power that could certainly be leveraged, and the desire for high performance products, we've set up a working group with window manufacturers, with manufacturer associations, with academia, with consultants, with other not-for-profit organizations. So we're excited to see how those collaborative efforts will go. So in conclusion, recent energy-based funding sources have permitted TCHC to take a portfolio-wide perspective, which is certainly a luxury we haven't had in the past. So it certainly creates a new opportunity for us. EnerPHit itself aligns with TCHC's philosophy of putting tenant well-being and comfort at the center of our design and engineering efforts. And lastly, TCHC's buying power has the ability to spur innovation and influence the market's willingness to apply passive house principles while driving down price points through volume. So once again, we'll have a call out here, but we're excited to be on this journey and look forward to connecting and hearing from you. So I've included our email addresses below if you'd like to reach out. Thanks for your time, everyone.